For too long, certain stories have been carefully managed, their truths veiled by power and privilege. But what happens when that veil is not just lifted, but ripped away on live television for millions to see? What happens when a Congresswoman, with everything to lose, confronts a figure once thought untouchable? Get ready, because the silence is about to be shattered. If you believe the truth matters, if you're tired of hidden agendas, then subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and leave a comment below to tell us what you think. This isn't just a story, it's a testament to the power of a single voice. The studio lights hummed, casting a sterile glow across the familiar set. Dark blue, backlit panels served as a backdrop, lending an air of gravitas that usually preceded discussions of policy, polls, or the ever-present political squabbles designed for prime-time consumption. High chairs, positioned just so, framed the four invited guests and the lone moderator, Felix Roman, a man whose career was built on smoothly navigating manufactured controversy. Coffee mugs, meticulously placed, set untouched props in a carefully choreographed spectacle. People tuning in from living rooms across America, sprawled on sofas with takeout, or hunched over tablets during a late-night work break, had no idea. They believed they were about to witness more of the same: polite debate, sidestepped questions, perhaps a carefully worded jab or two. They were utterly unprepared for the seismic shift that was about to rupture the fabric of political television. Seated third from the left, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was an enigma of calm. In a tailored navy blazer, her posture was impeccable, almost reserved. Her expression remained largely unchanged, a mask of quiet observation that belied the storm brewing beneath. For the first 20 minutes, she listened intently, a pen occasionally scratching notes onto a pad, her contributions to the initial banter minimal, almost imperceptible. She was a silent observer, a background figure in the grand theater of national politics, a role many in Washington might have expected her to play. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to simply fill a chair. Across from her, elegant and poised, sat Melania Trump. She moved with a practiced grace, her gaze unwavering, her smile a well-rehearsed curve that never quite betrayed emotion. She was doing what she had done countless times before in these arenas, sidestepping tough questions with a practiced charm, deflecting uncomfortable inquiries with an aura of untouchable dignity. The audience, accustomed to this routine, didn't blink. They had seen this dance before, the art of appearing to engage while revealing nothing. It was a performance perfected over years, designed to project an image of quiet strength and unassailable grace. But then the host, Felix Roman, with a practiced flourish, pivoted the conversation. And speaking of our political landscape, he began, let's turn our attention to ethics and accountability, particularly within leadership roles. Congresswoman Crockett, I'm curious about your thoughts on the evolving standards for public figures. It was a standard query, boilerplate, meant to invite a general discussion. But something shifted the air, a subtle ripple through the studio's carefully controlled atmosphere. Jasmine, who had been sitting patiently, leaned forward. It wasn't a dramatic lunge, not an aggressive move. It was just enough to send a silent message across the polished table directly to Melania Trump. It was a message that bypassed words, sidestepped rhetoric, and landed with the quiet, unsettling weight of an unspoken promise: I'm ready. The stage was set, the silent count had begun, and the world was about to hold its breath. The air in the studio, already thick with the unspoken tension Jasmine had initiated, crackled when she finally spoke. Her voice, smooth yet firm, sliced through the carefully constructed veneer of politeness. Well, Jasmine said, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the room, since we're talking about ethics, let's stop pretending some people get a free pass just because of who they married. The words hung in the air, a declaration that felt less like a question and more like a verdict. The panel went quiet. The host, Felix Roman, blinked, his seasoned composure momentarily fractured. Melania Trump, who moments before had exuded unshakable confidence, tilted her head slightly, a subtle shift that was perhaps her only outward sign of disquiet. I'm sorry, she murmured, her tone laced with a practiced indignation. Was that directed at me? Jasmine didn't flinch. She had anticipated the deflection, the feigned innocence. This was the moment. With deliberate, unhurried movements, she reached into her bag. There was no frantic fumbling, no dramatic flourish. It was simply the purposeful action of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and why. She pulled out a neatly stacked folder, its edges crisp, its contents a silent threat. She placed it on the gleaming studio table with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the sudden hush. Then, with a slow, almost artistic motion, she slid off the clip, revealing the neatly photocopied records within. One after another, she began laying them out. "These are transaction logs," Jasmine stated calmly, her voice resonating with an authority that needed no shouting, "offshore account filings, and a report from an abandoned investigation in upstate New York." Each word landed with the precision of a surgeon's cut. Her gaze flickered briefly, almost impersonally, toward Melania. "All tied to shell companies used in the late 2000s, and every single one has a connection to your name. You could have heard a pen drop in the control booth, let alone on the set." Melania's eyes, usually so guarded, flicked down at the documents. Her mouth opened, then closed, a rare moment of indecision playing across her features. She looked at Felix, then back at Jasmine, as if searching for a cue, a script. "That's absurd," she finally managed, the nervous smile that spread across her lips failing to reach the sudden, frantic glint in her eyes. "This is clearly an attack. I won't engage in conspiracy theories. It's not a theory if it's backed by court records and banking logs," Jasmine replied, her voice still measured, still calm. She didn't have to raise it. The facts, laid bare on the table, screamed louder than any shout. Behind the cameras, a different kind of chaos erupted. Producers were scrambling, their faces a mixture of disbelief and panic. Someone in the control booth was signaling frantically, their hands a blur of urgent gestures. An assistant rushed onto the set, handing a note to Felix, but it was too late. The damage was already done. Clips of the exchange were being recorded live by viewers on social media, their fingers flying across keyboards and touchscreens. Within minutes, hashtags like #CrockettTVSMelania and #JasmineHasReceipts began trending. A wildfire of public engagement that none of the network's carefully planned segments could ever hope to achieve. Melania, momentarily regaining her footing, attempted to pivot. "We're here to talk about America's future," she stated, her voice regaining some of its familiar steel, "not dig up ancient nonsense from foreign countries." Jasmine interrupted gently, yet with an undeniable force. "With all due respect, when your past raises questions about money laundering and influence, it is America's future." Felix Roman, finally regaining his voice, attempted to steer the conversation away, his tone bordering on desperate. "Let's stay on topic, please." "I am on topic," Jasmine said, her eyes locked on Melania, refusing to break contact. "The topic is accountability." People watching at home were glued to their screens. No one had ever confronted Melania like this. Not on live national television. Not with facts. Not with documentation. Not with the kind of unwavering confidence that announced, without a single boast, "I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm risking." And just like that, the story, once a tightly controlled narrative, slipped out of the studio's control, spilling into the collective consciousness of a nation. The explosion on live television, the trending hashtags, Melania's public shock, none of it was accidental. Before Jasmine Crockett ever touched that folder, before the camera lights glowed red, she had made a profound peace with what might come next. The battle had been fought days earlier, not on a brightly lit set, but in the quiet, unassuming corner of a diner just outside Fort Worth. 3 days before the round table, the scent of stale coffee and sizzling bacon hung heavy in the air of the daily grind, the kind of place where waitresses still called you on and refilled your mug without asking. Jasmine sat across from her chief of staff, Kenny Rowe, his usual boisterous energy subdued. A folder lay between them on the Formica table, not the same one she'd carried to live television, but a twin, its contents equally damning. "This isn't just political, JAS," Kenny said, leaning in, his voice low, almost a whisper against the clatter of breakfast plates. "You're talking about Melania Trump. They're gonna come after you hard. The full weight of that machine. Lawsuits, smears, digging up every single thing you've ever done." Jasmine stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. She didn't drink it. Her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the diner's perpetually steamy window, a distant, unyielding point. "Let them," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the force of steel. People need to stop pretending she was just an accessory in all of this. There's paperwork, Kenny. There's proof. Kenny sighed, glancing nervously toward the bustling kitchen. Proof don't always win, he muttered, shaking his head. Sometimes it just gets you buried. She didn't answer right away. Jasmine Crockett had spent most of her adult life walking into rooms where she wasn't expected to talk, let alone lead. A black woman from the south side of Dallas, with no family money, no legacy name to smooth her path, just pure grit and an unshakable belief in facts. She'd fought her way through law school, spent years as a public defender tirelessly advocating for the overlooked, and eventually made it to Congress on the backs of grassroots supporters who believed in her. Fire, not her connections. Not everyone in Washington respected her, but they all feared how sharp she was, how precisely she could cut through the noise when she finally chose to speak. "I'm not trying to start a fire," she finally said, pulling her gaze back to Kenny, her eyes intense. "I'm trying to show people it's already burning." Back at her apartment that night, the city lights a distant hum against her window, she went through every page again. Reports from an abandoned fraud case in Syracuse that no one had ever followed up on, its threads conveniently severed. Signatures from Melania's alleged European ventures, names misspelled, dates mismatched in a bewildering dance of obfuscation. Then, the financial documents, wire transfers to shell companies in the British Virgin Islands, dated just a year before Donald Trump began his presidential campaign. She didn't have the whole picture, not every piece of the sprawling, global puzzle, but she had enough corners to make out what had once been hidden in plain sight. Still, there was a weight to it that night, a heavy cloak she couldn't shed. It wasn't just the looming threat of lawsuits or the predictable political blowback. This was a personal gamble, a direct challenge to a system designed to protect the powerful. She wasn't just going after a former First Lady. She was taking on the machinery that had kept powerful people protected for decades, a silent conspiracy of omission. Her phone buzzed, a message from a friend at an independent news outlet in Pittsburgh. "Are you seriously going through with this?" It read. "They'll twist it. They'll say you're angry, unstable." Jasmine stared at the screen for a moment, the words familiar echoes of every barrier she'd ever faced. Her reply was swift, cutting through the doubt. "They always say that, until they can't." The fire Jasmine Crockett spoke of, the one already burning beneath the polished surface of power, was fueled by embers scattered years ago, meticulously ignored. To understand the inferno she ignited on live television, one had to go back, far back into the shadows where Melania Trump had spent years trying to keep her true origins buried. Long before she was a household name, before the glossy profiles and rehearsed interviews painted a fairy tale of ascent from Sevnica, Slovenia, to First Lady, Melania was simply Melania Naus. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't interested in fairy tales. She wanted to know what had been deliberately left out of the story. The first thread, almost too fine to notice, was flagged by one of Jasmine's interns, a sharp 24-year-old named Troy Whitman. Troy, whose boundless energy for digging through obscure archives often bordered on obsession, had been combing through historical registries from Europe. What he found were inconsistencies that screamed louder than any direct accusation. 3 separate companies tied directly to Melania Naus's name, none of which had ever been disclosed during her husband's tumultuous campaign for the presidency. She signed off on a patent application in Zurich in '98, Troy told Jasmine one afternoon, his voice buzzing with barely contained excitement as they huddled in her cramped Capitol Hill office, surrounded by stacks of documents and half-eaten sandwiches. Problem is, she claimed in interviews that she was already in the US full-time by then. Jasmine leaned over the documents, her brow furrowed. "What kind of patent?" she asked, her mind already racing through the implications. "Jewelry designs," Troy replied, very vague. But the paper trail doesn't go cold until 2003, which means she had ongoing business ties overseas long after she claimed she didn't. It might have sounded harmless old paperwork, forgotten jewelry designs, but Jasmine had practiced law long enough, seen enough financial crime, to know what offshore accounts were often used for, especially when the transactions didn't match. The pristine timelines presented to the public. Then came the Pennsylvania connection, a buried piece of legal history that Troy unearthed like a hidden tomb. A closed lawsuit, filed in 2006 in Allegheny County under the innocuous name Messnouse Holdings. At first glance, it appeared to be a routine real estate dispute, the kind of mundane legal wrangling that rarely saw the light of day. But tucked deep in the appendix, like a poisoned dart, was a sealed affidavit alleging wire fraud, its most damning signatures redacted. The judge, now retired, had sealed the file under the vague but powerful umbrella of national interest. No one, it seemed, had dared to look deeper. No one wanted to. Troy looked up from his laptop, his expression a mix of awe and grim realization. "She's got too many names attached to too many small, shady businesses," he declared, his voice a low growl. "Either she was laundering money or she's the unluckiest entrepreneur on earth." That comment, a dark joke, stuck with Jasmine for days, burrowing into her consciousness. She began building a meticulous timeline, 1996 to 2006, modeling gigs, green card inconsistencies, a boutique fashion line registered under a cousin's name in New Mexico, a short-lived consulting company in Miami with 0 employees and one massive, untraceable loan. It wasn't just suspicious, it was structured. Jasmine reached out to a contact in Harrisburg, someone who used to work in the state's financial crimes unit. He agreed to talk under the strict condition that his name never appeared in anything official. "You want my opinion?" he'd said after skimming through the files Jasmine had cautiously sent over. His voice was gravelly, world-weary. It was a cover operation. Shells to pull money through. Nothing big enough to make headlines, but just enough to keep people quiet. And the federal agencies? Either they weren't looking or someone told them not to. That's what burned the most, Jasmine realized, not the alleged crimes themselves, but how quickly silence moved in when the names became powerful. Melania had spent years shaping her image, always the elegant observer, never quite in the room when decisions were made. The world saw her as distant but harmless, but Jasmine saw it differently. The distance wasn't detachment, it was protection. The more she dug, the clearer it became. Melania hadn't just benefited from privilege, she had learned how to disappear behind it. There was one moment Jasmine kept coming back to, a seemingly innocuous charity gala in Dallas in 2012. Jasmine had been invited as a guest of a local firm. Melania had flown in for a brief appearance, spoke for 12 minutes, didn't answer questions, and left through the back hallway with 2 men who weren't listed as part of her official staff. Jasmine remembered it distinctly because it was the first time she truly noticed how guarded Melania was, even in a friendly room. "She's not untouchable," Jasmine told Kenny one late night in the office, the growing stack of folders between them. "She just walks like no one's allowed to ask questions." Kenny, looking exhausted, simply replied, "Yeah, but if you're gonna ask, make sure you have the kind of answers no one can spin." Jasmine held up her folders, her eyes gleaming with a fierce resolve. "That's exactly what I'm building," and once she had enough, she stopped talking about it. She didn't tease it to the press. She didn't leak pieces to pundits. She waited. She watched. She picked her moment. And when that live round table came knocking, she knew this wasn't about scoring political points. It was about asking the question that too many people had ignored: why has this woman's past always been treated as off limits? What made Jasmine Crockett stand on live television so potent wasn't just the presence of the documents, but the specter of the case that never made it to court, the one that vanished just as it was heating up, leaving behind only whispers and a chilling sense of unseen hands at work. This particular ghost of the past resided in a thin file, no grand title on its cover, just a stark date, June 17, 2011. Location, Syracuse, New York. It was about 12 pages long, unassuming in its physicality, but every sentence within it carried the crushing weight of suppressed truth. Jasmine had gotten it through a retired paralegal named Rodney Klein, a man whose quiet bitterness hinted at a career spent witnessing justice derailed. He'd once worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of New York, and through some forgotten quirk of the system, still possessed copies of old files the official records had long misplaced. This one wasn't supposed to vanish, Rodney had said, his voice raspy with years of unspoken frustration, as he slid the file across his cluttered kitchen table. But someone made it disappear. Inside was a memo, stark and procedural, referencing a woman named McNaws, a known alias of Melania, before she refined the spelling of her name in official U.S. documents. The memo outlined a federal inquiry into a suspected financial funneling scheme, small real estate purchases, sudden resales at suspiciously inflated prices, and offshore payments that bore no resemblance to legitimate tax records. The key witness, a Slovenian-born accountant named Lidija Korchi, had quietly been cooperating with the IRS. She'd been living in Buffalo under a temporary visa, working through an amnesty program for whistleblowers, her testimony poised to unravel the entire illicit structure, but her cooperation had come at a price. She vanished, Rodney continued, his gaze drifting to a faded photograph on his fridge. 2 weeks after this memo, she stopped showing up to check-ins, never picked up her last stipend. Apartment cleared out overnight. Jasmine flipped through the pages, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Any chance she went home? She asked, already knowing the answer. Rodney shook his head, a grim confirmation. Passports were flagged. No flight records. Nothing. At the time, the case was labeled inactive. Eventually, it was closed under the euphemism of insufficient supporting testimony. In short, without Lidija, the case died quietly. No headlines. No accountability. Jasmine sat with that for a long time, the implications chilling her to the bone. She contacted an old friend at the Syracuse Herald, a local reporter named Chelsea Morano, who had briefly covered the story when it first emerged. "I remember that," Chelsea told her over the phone, her voice tinged with a lingering sense of defeat. "We tried to follow up, but the federal office stonewalled us. Then 2 of our editors got pulled into private meetings, and the story just vanished. Did you ever hear Melania's name in connection to it?" Jasmine pressed. Chelsea hesitated. "Never on record. But there were whispers back then. We thought it was crazy. I mean, a Slovenian model mixed up in real estate laundering seemed like a reach. But now I'm not so sure." Jasmine stared out the window of her office, watching the rain slide down the glass. Everything about the case reeked of interference. Quiet, sophisticated interference. There was also a list of properties, 7 in total, bought and sold through shell companies in upstate New York. Each one purchased under $400,000, then resold within 18 months for at least double. No renovations, no clear buyers, just paper trails that went in circles, disappearing into a labyrinth of holding companies. The final buyer on 3 of those homes, a trust linked to a man Melania had reportedly dated in the 1990s, someone with close ties to European banking networks. The deeper Jasmine looked, the clearer the pattern became. Identities were being moved around like chess pieces. One wrong question, and the entire game disappeared. She printed every page, every map, every coded note, pinned it all on her office wall like a detective piecing together a cold case, the threads of suspicion intertwining into an undeniable web. Kenny walked in one afternoon and simply stared. "You're not letting this go, are you?" he asked, his voice tinged with a weariness that matched the weight of the evidence. Jasmine didn't even look up. "Would you?" He shook his head, then pulled up a chair. "So, what's the plan?" "We show people," she said, her voice quiet but resolute, "that power has fingerprints, even when it wears a designer gown and smiles for the cameras." There was one last thing in the file that Jasmine couldn't ignore. A letter, unsigned, typed and scanned, its words cut through the clinical details of fraud and finance. "To whom it may concern, there are names you're not supposed to say and places you're not supposed to look. If you keep going, don't expect applause. Expect silence. Expect doors to close. But do it anyway. Some things are worth the price." Jasmine had no idea who wrote it, but she read that last line over and over again. Do it anyway. That letter was why she didn't hesitate when the round table invitation came. That letter was why she printed the documents, packed the folder, and told no one, not even her communications director, what she was about to do. Because when a system counts on silence, the loudest thing you can do is speak. The round table didn't just catch Melania off guard. It sent shockwaves into a carefully managed world that wasn't built to be questioned. The producers, with their meticulously scheduled segments, a 7-minute opener on bipartisan strategy, a short debate on immigration reform, then a 10-minute panel on political accountability where Jasmine was slotted, had meticulously choreographed the entire broadcast. What they didn't plan for, what no one in the studio or control booth could have possibly foreseen, was what Jasmine brought with her. The studio in Stamford, Connecticut, was supposed to be neutral ground. No DC theatrics, no Capitol Hill pretense. The cameras were discreet, the lighting soft, the atmosphere designed for a polished, safe, and utterly forgettable segment. Felix Roman, the host, a man who had glided through 2 decades of controversies, like they were choreography, watched, stunned, as Jasmine laid out the evidence in front of him. The air in the room didn't just shift, it solidified, heavy with unspoken implications. Felix looked at the camera, then back at Jasmine, his face a canvas of disbelief, clearly unsure whether to cut to break or lean into the unfolding drama. Producers in the control room waved frantically through the glass, their faces contorted in silent screams for him to intervene, to restore order. But he didn't move. Something about her tone, her quiet, unyielding presence, held him captive. You're saying Melania Trump was connected to financial misconduct during the time her husband was planning his presidential campaign? Felix finally managed, trying to slow things down, to regain some semblance of control. I'm saying, Jasmine replied, flipping to another page in her folder, her voice still without a tremor, that there were financial structures tied to her name. Structures that moved money through New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware under the names of companies that didn't exist past a single tax season. Melania's expression remained unreadable, but her hands, gripping the arms of her chair just a bit tighter, betrayed the tremor beneath her poised facade. Her peer assistant, sitting just off camera, shifted uneasily in her seat, a silent alarm ringing in the hushed studio. These are serious allegations. Felix tried again, his voice now laced with a desperate urgency. Have they been verified? Most of them have been ignored, Jasmine said, her tone never rising, but cutting with the sharpness of glass. But they were never hidden. You just had to look. And someone finally did. That line "you just had to look" was clipped and reposted online before the segment even ended, a battle cry for every amateur sleuth and disgruntled citizen. Melania finally spoke, her voice brittle. This is political theater. I'm not going to dignify these lies with a response. Jasmine met her eyes for the first time, a gaze that was neither accusatory nor triumphant, just steady. If they're lies, you should welcome an investigation. Silence. Even the studio lighting felt hotter, pressing down on the scene. Felix cleared his throat. Okay, let's get back to. But it was already too late. The control rooms. Earpieces were erupting with calls, network affiliates, sponsors. Some demanded the feed be cut. Others, sensing the unprecedented engagement, begged them to keep rolling. They'd never had this kind of engagement in real time. Melania shifted strategy, adopting a familiar defensive posture. You're attacking me because you have no real policy. You're not talking about the economy or healthcare. You're obsessed with tearing down women who succeed. Jasmine's response was fast, but firm. If success comes at the cost of silence and manipulation, it deserves to be examined. I'm not here to tear anyone down. I'm here to speak up when too many people have been told to look the other way. The other panelists sat frozen, one of them, a former federal prosecutor from Phoenix, whispering to his neighbor off mic, "This is going to blow up big time." After the segment wrapped, Felix walked off stage, shaking his head. "We just aired the most important 7 minutes of the year," he muttered, "and none of it was in the script." Melania stormed out, forgoing press availability, refusing handshakes. Her team moved quickly, her assistant on the phone with legal counsel before they even reached the elevator. A junior staffer tried to recover the folder from Jasmine's desk during cleanup. Jasmine had already taken it with her. Backstage, a few makeup artists clapped quietly as Jasmine walked by. She didn't smile. She didn't need to .by the time she reached the curb outside. Her phone was already vibrating non-stop. Messages, missed calls. Her Twitter notifications were exploding. One text stood out. It was from a woman Jasmine hadn't spoken to in years, a retired IRS investigator from Cleveland. It simply said, "You said what most of us were too afraid to. I'm proud of you." But Jasmine didn't have time to take it in. The backlash was coming, and it wouldn't be subtle. What started in a studio chair was about to ripple through the political machine like a cracked wire no one could fix. The hearing room wasn't built for drama. Pale beige walls, stiff-backed chairs, microphones that never quite worked right. It was a setting designed for bureaucratic tedium, not earth-shattering revelations. Yet, when Jasmine Crockett walked through the double doors that morning, You could feel the weight shift, the air charged with an electric anticipation. It had been 19 days since the round table went viral, 19 days of mounting public pressure, of a relentless flood of bipartisan concern. Now, the House Subcommittee on Government Oversight had scheduled a formal review to discuss Jasmine's claims. What had started as a 7-minute interruption on a live show was now a congressional matter, a full-blown reckoning. Cameras lined the walls, their lenses hungry. Reporters scribbled fast, their pens scratching furiously, desperate to capture every nuanced expression, every loaded word. Viewers tuned in from airports, from offices, from living rooms across the country. They weren't just curious anymore. They wanted answers. The room was packed, but strangely quiet, a collective holding of breath. Jasmine wore a plain dark blazer, no statement jewelry, no bright colors, just focus. Representative Harold Klein, who chaired the subcommittee, opened with a neutral, almost weary tone. Today's session is not a trial, he intoned. It is not a political spectacle. It is a step toward clarity. He turned toward Jasmine, his gaze heavy. Congresswoman Crockett, the floor is yours. She didn't thank him. She didn't posture. She simply adjusted the microphone, leaned forward, and began. Everything I presented was based on documentation obtained through legal and public channels. Court filings, financial transfers, recorded transactions. This isn't about politics. It's about patterns. Patterns that suggest misuse of trust, of power, and of silence. She paused, letting her words sink in, then added, with a quiet, devastating force, if these patterns were tied to anyone else, anyone without that last name, this room would have been full years ago. Subtle gasps rippled through the gallery. Klein looked uncomfortable, flipping through his folder. A junior representative from Maine cleared her throat, trying to interject. Are you saying the former First Lady is guilty of a crime? I'm saying she was involved in a structure that deserves investigation, Jasmine replied, unwavering. And that until now, no one had the stomach to ask the hard questions. At that precise moment, a document was projected onto the large screen. Behind her, one of the verified wire transfers routed through a shell entity in Dover, Delaware. Jasmine walked the committee through the details, the date, the recipient, the origin account, and the matching number from a Slovenian asset ledger. All of it connected. The room didn't breathe. Melania Trump was not in attendance. Her legal team had submitted a statement. Mrs. Trump has nothing to hide. She will not dignify political bullying with her presence, but the cameras were already panning to every empty chair around the table. The symbolism spoke for itself. Halfway through the session, something unexpected happened. A former financial compliance officer, unlisted on the witness roster, stood up quietly in the gallery and handed an envelope to the sergeant-at-arms. Inside were copies of 6 invoices tied to a charity fund Melania had once publicly supported in Florida. None of the funds ever reached their stated beneficiaries. The committee froze. Jasmine looked at the documents as they were passed to her, her expression unreadable. She said nothing for a few seconds, then, "This is what happens when you crack." The door opened. People finally come forward. By late afternoon, the story was everywhere again, but with more weight this time. It wasn't just social media buzz. It was real questions from real people, backed by real documents. Even cable networks that had initially dismissed the round table were broadcasting highlights from the hearing on loop. Kenny watched from the side, arms crossed. This wasn't what they expected when they first stepped into that diner in Fort Worth 3 weeks earlier, he whispered to a staffer. I thought we were going to shake a tree. We started an avalanche. Outside, protesters had gathered. Some held signs in support of Jasmine, others shouted that she was a liar, a pawn, or worse, the usual chaos of controversy. But she didn't hear it. She stayed inside, watching the room change around her. As the hearing closed, Representative Klein cleared his throat again. We will reconvene next week after reviewing the additional materials submitted today. Let the record show that this is far from over. Jasmine nodded, stood, and left the room without a word. Cameras followed. Microphones extended. She said nothing, but people were speaking for her now. Strangers, experts, survivors of financial fraud who recognized the signs in what she'd revealed. Voices that had once been buried now echoed across the country. Her story had turned into a spark. Now the country was watching the fire. But the point of the fire was never destruction. It was to burn away what was hiding underneath. 2 weeks after the hearing, Jasmine found herself alone on a quiet balcony outside her district office in Arlington, Texas. The sun was low, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Her inbox was still full. Reporters were still calling. Investigators were still asking for more. But for the first time in over a month, the noise around her felt manageable, focused. Kenny joined her with a fresh stack of messages. 2 more subpoenas sent out this morning, and the committee's reviewing the charity files next week. Jasmine nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She looked out toward the skyline. You know what I keep thinking about? She mused. The people who wanted me to leave it alone, who told me I was overreaching, that I'd ruin my career if I opened my mouth. You didn't ruin anything, Kenny said, his voice soft but firm. You reminded people why truth still matters, but she knew it was more complicated than that. Her staff had received threats. Her mother had been harassed online. Lobbyists had pulled out of meetings. And yet, she had no regrets. This had never been about taking down Melania Trump. It had always been about breaking the illusion that if someone was rich enough, polished enough, or quiet enough, they didn't have to answer for their past. That illusion was gone now. Whether or not charges were ever filed, whether or not congressional hearings continued, something had fundamentally shifted. People had seen what it looked like when someone stood up and didn't back down. And more importantly, they saw what it took to do it. In the weeks following the hearing, more whistleblowers came forward. A former attorney who handled foreign licensing deals, a bank analyst who flagged suspicious transactions in 2010, even a Slovenian journalist who'd been blacklisted after publishing a piece about Melania's early financial dealings. None of them had spoken before. Now they were sending files, statements, willing to testify. One woman, a translator from New Jersey, left a voicemail Jasmine would never forget. I stayed quiet for years because I didn't think anyone would listen. But you made them listen. You didn't scream. You didn't run. You just showed up with the truth. Thank you. That message stuck with Jasmine more than any headline or trending hashtag. She knew people still doubted her. They always would. She'd heard the rumors that she was doing it for attention, that she was bitter, that she was trying to build a brand, all the old labels meant to shrink someone who refused to sit down. But none of it mattered now. What mattered was the ripple she started. In classrooms, students were studying the hearing as part of media literacy units. Activist groups were using her case as a template to push for transparency legislation. Other lawmakers, quietly at first, had begun asking deeper questions about financial disclosures, foundations, and foreign connections. Jasmine wasn't trying to become a movement. She just wanted to tell the truth and not be punished for it. And in doing that, she reminded people of something they'd almost forgotten. Silence may protect the powerful, but courage exposes what power tries to hide. Kenny returned to the office and handed her a letter. No name, just a return address in Des Moines. It read, I used to believe the system couldn't be challenged, that people like me didn't matter. But watching you stand up, with facts in your hand and fire in your voice, made me believe again. Thank you for making me feel seen. Jasmine folded the letter and slipped it into her desk drawer. She didn't know who wrote it, but she knew exactly why it was sent. Not every battle ends in court. Some end in change. And sometimes the biggest victory is simply refusing to be quiet. She turned to Kenny and said, this isn't over. No, he said, but now they know who's watching. And that was the difference. So when people ask about the day Jasmine Crockett challenged Melania Trump on live television, the documents she laid out, and the firestorm that followed, it's not just a story about scandal or headlines. It's a story about what happens when one person, with nothing to gain and everything to risk, chooses to tell the truth anyway. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice about silence, then speak up. Like this chapter, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave your comments below. Tell us how this story resonates with you. And if you believe the truth still matters, subscribe to our channel for more stories that defy the silence. Because the moment we stop asking questions is the moment we give our power away.